faking relationships or something like that. And I was like, well, what do you mean faking? He's like, I don't know why you even bothered to call and say happy anniversary, Meri. I'm like, because it's our anniversary.
30 years of marriage is supposed to be a milestone that couples look back on with pride, love, and shared memories. It's meant to be a celebration of everything two people built together through storms and sunshine. But for Kody and Meri Brown, their 30th wedding anniversary wasn't a joyous occasion. Instead, it was one of the most heartbreaking and awkward moments ever captured on Sister Wives. What should have been a day filled with love turned into a public reminder that their relationship had become little more than an empty shell. Fans will never forget that picnic. A blanket spread on the grass, a basket of food, and Meri's sweet gesture of 30 Rice Krispie treats, one for each year of marriage. On the surface, it looked like a simple, tender attempt to spark a moment of closeness. But beneath the surface, everything was crumbling. Instead of warmth, the air was filled with tension. Instead of joy, there was distance. And instead of love, there was a painful silence that revealed far more than words ever could. Meri tried to reach out, to create a moment of connection with the man she had stood beside for decades. She asked the hard questions, the vulnerable ones. Would he even care if she leaned in for a kiss? Would he push her away? It was raw, desperate, and deeply sad, because the truth was written all over Kody's face. He had already checked out, while she was still clinging to the hope that something could be saved. This wasn't just an anniversary. It was a mirror held up to the entire reality of their marriage. One partner was fighting to hold on, while the other had already let go. And for millions watching, it was almost too painful to witness. That day revealed more than a broken marriage. It revealed the loneliness of a woman still yearning for love and the cold detachment of a husband who had long since moved on. Welcome to TLC Sister Wiv, S Daily. My name is Sarah, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. If you've ever watched a moment on this show and felt your heart ache, then you'll understand why this story matters. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments because I want to hear how you felt watching that anniversary scene. Did it break your heart the way it did mine? The anniversary picnic looked simple enough at first glance. A blanket was spread neatly across the grass, a basket set down with quiet intention, and Meri's handmade gesture of 30 Rice Krispie treats sat waiting, one for every year she and Kody had shared a marriage. It should have been a sweet and touching moment, the kind of small tradition that couples look back on with warmth. Yet instead of creating joy, the scene unfolded into one of the most uncomfortable moments the audience had ever seen. What was meant to be a celebration ended up becoming a living symbol of everything broken between them. Meri's effort was clear. She wanted to bring something lighthearted and sentimental, something that showed she still cared enough to honor their 30 years together. Her smile carried both hope and uncertainty as she presented her surprise, almost as if she was waiting for Kody to meet her halfway, to give her something in return. But Kody's reaction was muted, distant, and almost dismissive. His words lacked affection, and his body language screamed disinterest. The contrast between Meri's hopeful energy and Kody's cold detachment was sharp enough to make viewers squirm in their seats. As they sat together, Meri tried to bridge the emotional gap. Her words became bolder, more vulnerable, because she knew there was something missing and she desperately wanted clarity. She asked him directly if he noticed when she flirted, if he even felt anything anymore. Then came the question that cut deep. Than any other. If she leaned in to kiss him right then, would he push her away? It wasn't playful, it wasn't casual. It was the kind of question that only comes from someone who already knows the answer but still hopes against hope that they might be wrong. Fans watching the scene felt the sting right alongside her. It wasn't just awkward, it was painful, almost unbearable, to witness her put her heart on the line only to be met with a wall of indifference. Many described it as cringeworthy. Not because Meri was embarrassing herself, but because the lack of connection was so glaring that it made every second uncomfortable. What should have been a romantic anniversary date had turned into a public display of disconnection. And in that one picnic, with a blanket, a basket, and 30 treats, the heart of their broken marriage was laid bare for the world to see. That picnic wasn't just an isolated moment of awkwardness. It was the product of years, even decades, of growing distance between Kody and Meri. By the time their 30th anniversary arrived, their marriage wasn't simply strained, it was hollow. The anniversary only exposed what had been quietly building for a long time. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It was the slow erosion of connection, little by little, until there was nothing left but silence. Kody himself admitted openly that he no longer had romantic feelings for Meri. He said it without hesitation, without even trying to soften the blow. It was a blunt acknowledgement that the marriage had stopped being about love a long time ago. For him, intimacy was gone, and not just in the physical sense. In fact, he admitted that the two hadn't shared any true intimacy in more than 10 years. 10 years is a lifetime to go without affection, without touch, without that closeness that keeps a marriage alive. For most couples, that would feel unimaginable. For Meri, it was her daily reality. Yet even with the coldness from Kody, Meri tried to hold on. She showed up, she put in effort, and she continued to look for ways to revive something that had already flatlined. That 30th anniversary picnic wasn't the first time she tried to spark a connection. It was just one of the most visible examples of her reaching out and being left hanging. Her persistence came from a place of loyalty and love, but it also carried a heavy cost. Because staying in a marriage where one partner has already given up isn't just lonely, it's soul-crushing. It chips away at self-worth. It leaves a person constantly questioning what more they could do, what they did wrong, and why their love wasn't enough. Meri lived in that space for years, trying to bridge a gap that only grew wider with time. While Kody moved on emotionally, Meri was left carrying the weight of the relationship on her own shoulders. The anniversary wasn't just about an awkward picnic. It was the sharp reminder that Meri's struggle had gone on for far too long, and that the cost of clinging to something so one-sided had drained her emotionally. It showed the heartbreaking truth that love can't survive when it only comes from one side. When the 30th anniversary picnic aired, it didn't just fade into the background as another quiet episode of Sister Wives. It became one of the most talked about, most dissected, and most uncomfortable moments in the show's history. What was supposed to be a celebration of endurance turned into a viral scene that fans couldn't stop cringing at, replaying, and reacting to. In a way, the anniversary date became infamous, not because it was romantic, but because it was so painfully devoid of romance that it felt like watching a marriage collapse in real time. Clips of the scene began circulating online almost immediately. On forums, Reddit threads, and social media discussions, people shared their secondhand embarrassment, admitting they could barely sit through it without looking away. Viewers described it as sad, awkward, and even unbearable. One fan summed up what many felt when they said the interaction didn't just seem uncomfortable, it felt like watching someone beg for affection from a person who had nothing left to give. That raw, one-sided vulnerability struck a nerve because it was so public, so exposed, and so relatable for anyone who has ever loved someone who no longer loved them back. The reaction from fans quickly shifted from empathy to criticism. Many labeled Meri desperate, a word that followed her like a shadow after the episode aired. It wasn't just about the picnic, it was about the years of her trying to hold on to a man who had already shut the door. For some viewers, her persistence looked humiliating. They couldn't understand why she continued to fight for scraps of attention when it was clear Kody had no intention of returning her love. Being called desperate was cruel, but it reflected how her vulnerability was perceived in a world where honesty is often mistaken for weakness. What made the humiliation even worse was the stark contrast playing out in the family at the same time. While Meri sat on a blanket fighting for crumbs of affection, Robyn seemed to live in a completely different marriage. Kody's favoritism toward her wasn't hidden. He laughed with Robyn, showed her physical affection, and defended her in ways he never did for Meri. That favoritism wasn't just visible to the wives, it was visible to millions of viewers. Every hug, every smile, every moment of warmth he reserved for Robyn made his coldness toward Meri even more glaring. For Meri, the comparison must have been devastating. It wasn't only that Kody rejected her, but that he so openly gave to another wife the very things she craved. Fans couldn't ignore the imbalance. They saw one woman fighting for acknowledgement while another was elevated as the favorite. That dynamic made Meri's struggle not just a private pain, but a public humiliation. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors. It played out on national television for the world to watch, rewind, and comment on. And comment they did. Every Aachen, ward glance, every pained question, every dismissive answer was dissected, replayed, and turned into evidence of a marriage that no longer existed. What stung most was that Meri wasn't just losing her relationship, she was losing her dignity in front of an audience. The words cringy and sad became the unofficial titles of her 30th anniversary, and the internet ensured they would stick. The anniversary date wasn't remembered for joy, love, or even nostalgia. It was remembered for its emptiness, for the desperation that fans said they could feel radiating from the screen, and for the way it confirmed what many already suspected. Kody's love for Meri was gone, and Robyn had taken center stage. That public humiliation cemented the end of their story as husband and wife, leaving Meri not only abandoned, but abandoned in front of the entire world. After years of rejection and the sting of public humiliation, Meri reached a point where she needed something different. The pain of her marriage with Kody had followed her for so long that it seemed to weigh down everything she did. But then, almost quietly, she decided to give herself a gift that had nothing to do with anniversaries, family gatherings, or trying to win someone's affection. She packed her bags, got in her car, and set off on a solo road trip. It might have seemed like a simple decision on the surface, but for Meri, it marked a turning point. It was a sign that she was ready to explore life on her own terms, without waiting for Kody to come along. On that road trip, she shared glimpses of her journey with her followers. She posted selfies from the driver's seat, her smile looking lighter than it had in years. She talked about how much she loved being on the open road, listening to her favorite audiobooks, blasting music, and stopping whenever and wherever she wanted. In her words, you could sense a new kind and of joy, one that came not from trying to hold on to a broken relationship, but from discovering herself again. She described the beauty of the places she saw, how magical it felt to experience the breathe, to think, and to feel something other than sadness. That trip symbolized far more than a getaway. It was freedom, pure and simple. For so long, Meri's life had revolved around making things work with Kody, around showing up for a marriage that no longer wanted her presence. Every action she took seemed weighed down by what he did or didn't feel for her. But in the quiet of that car, with the windows down and her favorite songs filling the air, Meri didn't have to think about Kody. She didn't have to ask permission, she didn't have to face rejection, and she didn't have to question her worth. She could just exist, fully and freely, in a way that felt brand new. Travel has a way of shifting perspective, and for Meri, it was exactly that. Each mile put distance between her and the emptiness of her marriage. Each new town, each stretch of highway reminded her that there was more to life than waiting on someone who had stopped showing up years ago. In the driver's seat, she wasn't Kody's neglected wife or the woman fans labeled desperate. She was just Meri, a woman in her 50s, capable of making her own choices, discovering joy in the simple act of being alone and being free. This solo trip was her quiet rebellion, her way of proving that she didn't need to be defined by her broken marriage. It hinted at something larger brewing inside her, a realization that she could, and maybe should, carve out a life completely separate from Kody. While the picnic had shown the world her vulnerability, the road trip showed her strength. It was her way of saying, without words, that she still had the power to create joy, to seek beauty, and to choose herself. Fans watching this transformation could feel the shift. This wasn't the Meri who begged for scraps of affection on a blanket in the grass. This was a woman beginning to take back her narrative. And though the road trip was just one journey, it marked the beginning of a new one, the slow but powerful journey of rediscovering her independence. Meri's turning point on the road didn't just stay confined to that trip. It carried her back home with a different outlook, and soon she began to say out loud the things that had been left unspoken for years. For the first time, she publicly admitted what had long been obvious, that she and Kody were estranged. She didn't hide behind hopeful language or vague statements. Instead, she called it what it was, a relationship that had withered away until there was nothing left but the formality of being tied together. In interviews and on her own social media, Meri acknowledged the reality. She and Kody weren't truly husband and wife anymore. They were just friends, if even that. There was no partnership, no intimacy, no emotional connection holding them together. What had once been a marriage was now little more than a label. It was a painful confession, but in speaking those words out loud, she found a strange kind of freedom. For years, Meri had stayed silent, hoping that loyalty and patience might somehow bring Kody back to her. She endured rejection without making a scene, presenting herself as the dutiful wife even when her heart was breaking. But eventually, silence became too heavy to carry. By finally naming her marriage as estranged, Meri stepped into her truth. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave her ownership of her story in a way she had never claimed before. The honesty was difficult, but it was also empowering. She admitted it felt freeing, even though it came with the sting of finality. For the first time, she wasn't speaking as someone waiting for Kody to choose her again. She was speaking as a woman who had accepted reality, who was no longer willing to live in denial. This shift changed the way fans saw her too. Instead of the desperate wife clinging to a man who had left her emotionally years ago, she began to look like someone reclaiming her dignity. Meri's confession marked a new chapter. By stepping out of silence and speaking her truth, she showed that she was no longer bound by Kody's rejection. The marriage might have collapsed, but she finally had the courage to say so in her own voice. By the time Meri admitted openly that her marriage to Kody was estranged, the public had already formed their own narrative about her life. For years, viewers had watched her reach out only to be rejected, and they didn't hold back their opinions. Online, she was often called desperate, pathetic, even worthless. Those words stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because they seemed to echo the rejection she was already living through inside her marriage. Every time she tried to hold on, those attempts were broadcast to millions, and instead of sympathy, she often received ridicule. It was as if her pain had become a spectacle for others to pick apart. But Meri didn't stay buried under those labels. Slowly, she began to push back against the perception that she was simply clinging to something dead. She acknowledged the criticism, admitted she had read the comments, and then said plainly that those words didn't define her. She wasn't desperate, she wasn't pathetic, and she certainly wasn't worthless. She was a woman who had given decades to a relationship that no longer gave back, and her persistence had come from a place of hope, not humiliation. That distinction mattered, and it was important for her to finally say it out loud. Reclaiming her dignity wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a series of small choices that added up to something powerful. Instead of letting the negativity drag her down, Meri began to use her voice in a different way. She showed glimpses of her life with humor, with openness, and with a refusal to let bitterness consume her. She laughed at herself when she could have cried. She shared lighthearted posts when others expected her to stay quiet and ashamed. By bringing humor into her story, she stripped away the power of the insults and reframed herself on her own terms. For so long, her identity had been tied to being Kody's first wife, the one who was cast aside in favor of another. But as she leaned into humor and honesty, she began to stand on her own. Fans who once pitied her started to notice a different energy, stronger, freer, even playful at times. This wasn't the Meri on the picnic blanket asking if her husband would push her away. This was a woman slowly building a life where that question didn't matter anymore. Her choice to cope with openness rather than silence signaled the start of a new chapter. Instead of investing her energy into Kody's indifference, she invested it into herself. She no longer tried to pretend that her marriage could be salvaged. Instead, she showed up as her authentic self, flaws and all, with a sense of humor about her situation and a willingness to move forward. That decision, to choose herself over a man who had long since stopped choosing her, was transformative. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it gave her back her voice and her dignity. It showed that even after decades of rejection, a person can still reclaim their worth and build a future that doesn't revolve around someone else's approval. For Meri, this was the real turning point. Not the picnic, not even the road trip, but the moment she stopped letting Kody's coldness define her value. By rejecting the cruel labels and embracing her own truth, she stepped fully into the life she deserved. And while her story had been marked by sadness, this was the beginning of something different, a life led by her own choices, not his indifference. What began decades ago with hope, faith, and a vision of eternal family had, by the time of that anniversary picnic, become something else entirely. Instead of a day of celebration, it turned into one of the most awkward and painful moments ever captured on camera. A moment fans will never forget, not because of joy, but because of its cringeworthy sadness. Meri sat on that blanket, bravely trying to spark a conversation, only to be met with indifference. What should have been a milestone of love ended up as a public symbol of heartbreak. Her story resonates far beyond the world of sister wives. Anyone who has ever fought too long for someone unwilling to fight back understands the weight of Meri's experience. She poured years of loyalty and devotion into a relationship that gave her little in return. For so long, she stayed, hoping that love, commitment, or even just history would be enough to rekindle something that was clearly gone. And when it didn't, she faced not only the rejection inside her marriage, but also the harsh judgment of the public eye. But what makes Meri's story powerful isn't just the pain, it's what she chose to do with it. Rather than staying trapped in the role others wrote for her, she started to reclaim her own narrative. The solo road trip, the candid admissions, the decision to use humor instead of shame, all of these marked her steps toward independence. Slowly but surely, she began to shift from being the wife Kody didn't want to being Meri, a woman rebuilding herself on her own terms. That's the part worth remembering. Not the sad picnic, not the humiliation, but the resilience that followed. Meri's journey is a reminder that even when someone else stops choosing you, you still have the power to choose yourself. And in doing that, you can transform years of rejection into the foundation for self-respect and a new kind of freedom. I'm Sarah, and thank you for joining me today on TLC Sister Wives Daily. If Meri's journey moved you the way it did me, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the stories behind Sister Wives. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, your worth is never defined by someone else's indifference.